Greetings. So we've talked about maps and locations a little bit, um, but let's talk about NPCs. So I was reading, the Shadow Dark book, and what they suggested for adventure. They're like start small, one location, a dungeon, two or three memorable NPCs, or a handful of memorable NPCs, and start. And I'm all for that. I think actually that's good advice for new and old GMs alike is to start small. But you got the location, you've got the dungeon or the scenario. What about the NPCs? And the NPCs, for me, historically, have been a little bit of a sticking point. That's my weak spot as a GM was making NPCs that were interesting and anyone cared about. Um, a lot of my NPCs for a very long time were fairly throwaway. Just there to move the MacGuffin or get the plot going and so on, but not really cool characters per se. And I've tried to change that in the past few years, and I've tried to work on that. And the funny thing is, um, making that work better did not mean putting in this huge amount of effort. Obviously, that was a phase that I tried, right? Not detailing every NPC down to the last stat, not detailing all their backstories and their histories and so on and so forth, and drawing giant webs of relationships. That actually did not work. And it certainly, even when it worked, it did not give me the value for the effort that was put in. So what I have gone to was a very keep it simple sort of concept, even with my NPCs. And so what that means is when I start looking at, well, what are my half a dozen NPCs? Now, keep in mind, I love recurring bases. I love recurring NPCs now, right? I want players to have a home base they come back to. They talk to the same people week after week. Um, and so your mileage may vary. Like if you're running a murder hobo roaming campaign, then recurring NPCs don't happen as much. They might. You might run into people on the way. But I find that for me, this works better if I have NPCs that I know are going to come back over and over and over, and that's going to give me the most bang for my buck. So keep that in mind. What I do when I think about NPCs is I think very quickly about their general archetype purpose. So the nobleman, the barmaid, the smith, the village priest, right? Go right there. There you go. That gives you at least the framework. Then I think about one or two physical characteristics that I'm going to use when I describe them. So the barmaid has a youthful face and striking red hair. The nobleman has dark, swept back hair, piercing eyes, and carries himself with regal bearing. Whatever. I do not go into a lot of detail. I'm not that good a description guy. I'm not a writer by trade or by hobby, and so I go in a couple sentences. I let the players go, and their imaginations can then take it. And some of them are vivid enough that they already have made a mental sort of picture of that person, even with what I've said. Also, you can go and if you want to use, um, whatever tools, go look up images on the internet. Like all of that is available to you, and that helps. But I actually don't necessarily know that that makes a huge difference, right? Um, that's up to you. Your mileage may vary, but if I then tell players that, oh, in the distance they see a flock of striking red hair, they're going to know who I'm talking about, as opposed to, do I have to hold the picture up every time of the barmaid, that kind of thing. The next thing I do is I go one or two traits of that character, which will be their initial defining traits. So Captain Thornton, who's a tiny bit overweight with a bushy mustache. Um, you know, his trait is that he is the captain of the guard. He's lazy and very protective of his his men and his domain, but not anything outside, right? So that's his sort of defining characteristic. The nobleman is not interested in nobleman stuff, but wants to be an adventuring hero. The barmaid is always looking for an angle, and she's a not quite compulsive, but nearly gambler, right? Like that kind of thing. Give them that one piece of, give them one or two traits. You don't have to go in and write a detailed motivation or detailed backstory, just something to get you started. The captain's lazy, the barmaid's a gambler, the nobleman wants to be an adventuring hero. There you go. Done. I also then typically think of one thing that I'm going to do or say when that NPC is on the scene to make sure the PCs know that this NPC is on the scene. You don't have to be super explicit about this. So, Captain Thornton, I speak in a crappy southern drawl, right? So, your captain's like, I put my hands behind my head. Yeah, because he's always leaning back in his chair. Well, that sounds like a you problem, doesn't it? Something like that, right? Patrick, the nobleman, I immediately sit up straight and carry, right? The barmaid, I might bother to, and again, I am in no way, shape, or form, I am as far as a theater kid as you will ever meet. But, right, just the one thing, the barmaid flips her hair, done. And then they know who's there. If I talk in that drawl, they know that it's Captain Thornton. I don't know if they know that if I hold myself up rigid, it's the nobleman. I don't, right, but you do the thing, and then you don't necessarily need super great voices or anything. You can just go in, and obviously you can literally tell them, oh, the barmaid walks up to you, and then right, and do the thing, and that sort of sets the tone for the conversation. They know who they're talking to. And that's how I start all the NPCs, just with that. The very little framework, that little skeleton that I can hang then things off of. And so that's the second part. So those NPCs are very one-dimensional, 100%. And I cop to that. That is absolutely the case. If you came to me and said, man, your NPCs all are one cliche, I'd be like, yes, they're cliche. Because cliches are easy and quick to parse for the players. You do not want to be super deep when you're first hitting these characters because and you don't want to be mysterious, because mystery and super big depth are things that the PCs, in the 2 minutes that they have to parse your NPC, aren't going to notice, right? So, they don't, if the captain has this 10-page backstory about being orphaned in Fort Talon, and that, that defined his worldview 50 years later, that's great. And by all means, if you love writing that stuff, write it. I'm not saying that's bad. And for some of you, it will inform your NPCs, and you do. But for me, how to convey that in a quick conversation about the goblins that are coming over the hill, very difficult for me. And so I don't do that. So what I will do, though, is I will lean back in my chair, pull out the southern drawl, and tell the characters, well, until they get to the walls, I'm not going to risk my boys out there in the field fighting your goblins. And done. And they know where he's coming from, right? And they can parse that, and they can work around it, or they can make their arguments based on what they know about him. So yes, the characters do start cliched and one-dimensional by design. Or I'm just making an excuse for myself. One or the other, but by design, honest to God. And then what? So once I have a stable of these characters, and these characters are recurring, and I have talked to the PCs several times, and they've gone to them, and they've done, right? They've interacted with them several times, and first off, this is going to give me a chance as a GM to see how these characters play out. So, when they take Patrick on an adventure, or Patrick sort of pushes his way onto an adventure with them, the nobleman, because he wants to be an adventurer, that allows me to then interact a little bit more and see where this character is going to go, right? See what other things I can hang off of the skeleton that I've made. And that's sort of the next part of all this. The next part of all this is that everything you do, every interaction you have with these characters, every event that happens in the home base, or or out and about in an adventure, um, then gives you one more thing to add to one of these characters. And you don't have to. It's not that everything has to have, but you can, right? So when they go out on an adventure with Patrick, you know, and he mentions that, um, and he mentions that he's the oldest and thus inheriting, or he mentions that his father didn't trust him enough with with coming to the new colony alone, so he sent his man Braxton with him, right? You can slowly hang things off of these characters. Um, and that can just come to you as a GM, and then you write it under the little, right? My little blurb for Captain Thornton's like this big, but then you write, you know, so in the latest adventure, a pair of traders came in with a mysterious box and a bunch of other, a bunch of other boxes, but this mysterious box. And what had happened is their son had been cursed to turn into like a were creature, and they were taking him to get the curse undone, but they had to stop here to trade for supplies, because this was, at the midway point of their journey. Kid gets loose, adventure, shit happens, right? Adventure happens. Um, and then I realized just how pissed Thornton would be about people bringing this into his town, right? Like, he's lazy, but he works real hard to maintain the lazy. And so when people bring him trouble, that pisses him off. So when the PCs are deciding what they, out of town, they've captured the kid again, and they're wondering what to do with the parents, and Thornton comes up, and Thornton, travels out to them and suggests that we hang them all because they got three of his guys killed. Then that gives me just a tiny bit more picture of sort of what this guy's about, right? You say what you will, and he wants to put his feet up on the desk, but if you screw with his order, he gets pissed and he lashes back out, right? Um, we had another very interesting exchange. Um, in the campaign, and that was Patrick's family, the nobleman's family, Falarin, and one of the PC's family, Vincent, are feuding continuously. And it just so happens that, and they're both in this colony, both have parts of this colony, and indeed, Patrick's man Braxton, his the advisor, um, saw an opportunity and essentially started a lawsuit against Vincent, against the PC's family, noble. And so that went for a couple weeks, and it was like a side thing. Like we were focusing on these various adventures, while the one PC, and I were exchanging some information back and forth about what this lawsuit might entail, and so on. And so when Vincent when Lord Vincent, the PC, got Patrick, the NPC, out of town, he laid into him, not because he thought the lawsuit was necessarily bad or unjust or whatever, but that Patrick, of noble blood, would allow this commoner, regardless of how much he is respected by the family or whatever, to push him around and force him to get to delve into this political muck, and told him he was disgusted with him because he should be in charge of his house and not this commoner. And I thought about that, and again hung this off of the skeleton of Patrick, and that really hurt him, right? That touched a nerve, and made him sort of brought up those thoughts. I said, well, maybe he doesn't feel like he is worthy of that noble right. His father doesn't trust him, and so maybe he doesn't trust himself, and he thus relies on his, he he pushes himself to leave, to go out, not necessarily because he wants to be an adventurer as much as he pushes himself to leave and go out to avoid having to deal with the things that he doesn't want to deal with at home, which is, I don't understand all this political mumbo jumbo and administrative mumbo jumbo. Please take care of it. But that hurt him, and that pointed that out to him. And so, of course, the next week he comes back, puts the papers down on Lord Vincent's desk and says the lawsuit is dropped. Never let it be said that I don't run my own household, right? And there's be ramifications for that. But I thought it was interesting because, again, that's nothing in my little blurb. Like all that uncertainty and so on, Patrick's just the guy who wants to be a hero and who leaves the nobling for others, for his servants. And then there was that discussion, and I thought, bam. And that's sort of what we're doing. We lay out the skeleton, and then we hang things off that skeleton as the players interact with these characters and as you think of things as the characters go. The other times that I sort of hang things off the characters are when I think of an adventure hook, or when I roll something on an event table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this stable of characters and think about, okay, who can I hang this off of? So, if one of the guys that owns one of the bars, Scaramond, he was, all I had for him was ex-pirate with mysterious past, spellcaster question mark, right? And that's mostly it. That's mostly all I had for him. And when I rolled, I had a little mini table of, well, what kind of things we want to do. And I had, I had gang of thugs, appear in town. Like, so I was thinking that, some kind of gang of ruffians or maybe boisterous laborers or thieves guild people come into town because there's, mountain trains that come over the mountains to go to this little colony. And I thought, okay, let's add like a little antagonist group. And I thought, well, who do I hang this off of? And I looked at my NPCs that I had, and I thought, let's hang it off of that guy. So he then becomes a ex-pirate. These guys are from his old ship that he abandoned, and and Scaramond has something that they need or that they want. A map or a treasure that he took when he left the ship. Done. And then that's the adventure seed. And now I know more about Scaramond because I needed that sort of, right? I could hang that event off of him, and that then expounds on that character. You do this about a dozen times, have a dozen interactions, a couple adventures, and so on and so forth, and then you flesh these guys out over time. And that's how I get my NPCs to be interesting and memorable. Start with the simple stuff, the cliches, the hooks, flesh them out over time, and let the PCs in on all that stuff. And I think they'll remember these NPCs a lot more than even if I had written gigantic backstories. So that's it. I'm going to leave this one short. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you all later on.